Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time it's the third episode in our Linux survival guide, in which I'm going to talk about hardware drivers with a particular focus on graphics cards, on GPUs, and also on setting up a printer. So let's go and get started. As I explained in the first part of this series, all Linux distros are based on the same Linux kernel. This contains drivers that allow a great deal of hardware to work automatically when connected to a Linux system. For example, all storage devices, keyboards and rodents should plug and play, as they will make use of an in-kernel driver. The Linux kernel also contains open source drivers for most GPUs, including those from Intel and AMD. So, if you're running onboard Intel graphics, or if you have an AMD GPU or APU, then satisfactory drivers should be put in place when you install or upgrade your Linux distro. This said, during any Linux install, always check the option to include additional third-party software. For example, here in the Ubuntu installer, be sure to tick the box to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi and additional media formats, as this will make sure that all readily available drivers are installed. Unlike Intel and AMD, NVIDIA has not made its Linux graphics drivers open source, so they cannot be included with a distro. The reasons for this are explained in this recent support post and relate to end-to-end product solutions for the workstation market. Alternative open-source NVIDIA GPU drivers called Nouveau are included in most Linux distros. But at present, these are not as effective as the proprietary Linux drivers from NVIDIA. So, to get the best performance from an NVIDIA GPU in Linux, you may want to install proprietary NVIDIA drivers. Some distros, such as Zorin OS as we're running here, can install the proprietary NVIDIA drivers for you during OS installation. Indeed, as we can see, when we boot up a Zorin OS USB drive, there is an option to try or install the operating system using modern NVIDIA drivers. And if you select this, the official NVIDIA drivers will be installed automatically with the rest of the operating system. In many other distros, we need to install the operating system itself and then switch to proprietary NVIDIA GPU drivers. So, for example, here I've got a clean install of Linux Mint on a PC with an NVIDIA graphics card, and we need to go down to the menu and go to Administration and Driver Manager. We need to put in my password, which is short because this is just a test setup, so we'll enter like that. And the Driver Manager will now look for hardware drivers. And there we are, it's found some, and I'll just organise the screen so we can see things clearly. There we are, and as you can see right now, the NVIDIA GeForce GT 1030 graphics card is using the open source Nouveau driver I was talking about earlier. But there are many alternatives from NVIDIA, proprietary drivers from NVIDIA listed here, one of which is recommended. That is of course the one I will select. And when you see a screen like this on a Linux distro to select an NVIDIA driver, you might have to make a sensible decision. Here we can obviously make an easy decision because one of the drivers is recommended. It isn't the latest, but it's clearly the recommended one. But you might see here something like after a driver it might say tested, that's always a good sign. It might say most recent, recent updated, something like that. You are going to have to make a choice. But I'll stick with the recommended choice, that's always a good idea, so I'll click on Apply Changes. And there we are, things are now complete. It did take a few minutes in the real world to sort itself out. So we now need to restart the PC. And here we are back in Linux Mint. Always good to be back in Linux Mint with our proprietary NVIDIA driver installed. And indeed, if we now go down to the menu and Administration, you will see we've got the NVIDIA X Server settings, graphics settings, so we can check out our GPU and set things up with it as you would in this type of panel in any other operating system. I'd note if you need to install NVIDIA drivers in other Linux distros, the process you go through is very similar. For example, here in Ubuntu, we would go to Software and Updates and then go to Additional Drivers, and you again search for some drivers. And there we are, we've got our list. Here, as you can see, the top one from NVIDIA is actually 495 proprietary and tested. That might have worked back in Linux Mint. We don't know. We could have picked that. But here I'd obviously pick that one, the top NVIDIA driver listed as proprietary and tested, and apply changes. As with most other things in Linux, other options are available beyond the basics I've covered here, including downloading drivers directly from AMD or NVIDIA for installation via the terminal. But what I've explained so far should work well in the majority of situations. This said, it is worth noting that if you're one of the first people to buy the very latest graphics card, you might have to wait for a few months for Linux driver support. So, avoid being a very early adopter of a new GPU if you're running Linux. Right, let's move on to setting up a printer. Linux uses the Common Unix Printing System, or CUPS, which was developed by Apple and is used in Mac OS, Linux and other Unix-like operating systems. A printer in Linux can be set up in many different ways, with the easiest being automatic detection. Today, this works for a lot of printers in mainstream Linux distros, and I'll demonstrate it here with my trusty Kyocera FS1300D laser printer. So, all we need to do is to make sure that our printer is plugged into the computer via USB and that the computer is connected to the internet. Here in Zorin OS, I'm also going to go into the menu and go to Settings and to Printers, which will come up down here. Where is it? I always lose it. There we are. There's Printers in Zorin OS. You can see no printer is there. And now all I need to do is to start things off by turning on the printer. There we go. Things have come to life. And hopefully things will be detected on the computer. And here we are, it's now configuring a new printer. Things seem to be working okay. It's now searching for drivers. And there we are, our printer has been set up, which is pretty good, isn't it? And if we go to additional printer settings, oh look, an application is requesting additional printer drivers. We'll go to additional printer settings then, just to make sure everything is okay. But I think this is going to work. I'm pretty sure it is because I use this printer almost every day in Linux Mint, so it should work. Let's just print a test page. I have a suspicion things will be okay, so let's just print a test page. And there we are. That looks like a test page to me in Zorin OS. That's pretty good. So everything here is now working okay. You might have noticed the driver that's been picked up is a generic PCL6 driver. That'll work with a great many laser printers, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And so I'm going to click on OK. Everything is set up. I've got a printer successfully installed here in Zorin OS. Right, that all worked perfectly. But what if your printer is not automatically installed, or the driver selected is not the best one to use? Well, to demonstrate the possibilities, here we are in Linux Mint. I thought we'd hop distros so you can see printer settings in different distros. And here we find printers under Administration and Printers. And what we're going to do here is to set up my rather old Epson Stylus Photo R300. We'll start out with automatic detection, so I'll turn the printer on and let that run through. And there we are, that's finished. Automatic detection has worked here. And if I click on the printer, we can bring up its driver, which as we can see is pretty reasonable. It seems to have all the stuff we need here. We can change the things we need to do, change type of paper, that type of stuff for printing photos, that type of stuff. But the one thing we can't do in this driver is to monitor ink levels. And this is quite a common issue with printer drivers in Linux. So this driver would work pretty well other than the ink monitoring issue, but let's assume we want to try something else. So I'll first of all right click this and delete to get rid of that printer so we don't have lots of different printers around to confuse us. And we'll now add a printer manually. And we can either click here or here to add. It's a free choice. I'm going to click up here like that. And here we've got various options for adding a printer, including network printer options, which I'll just open up so you can see they're there. We can search for a network printer, we can add a Windows network printer, all sorts of options for here, but I'm not going to go through adding a network printer simply because I don't have a network printer. So I might make a video in the future all about networking in Linux, adding printers and file sharing and all that sort of stuff, but it's not going to happen today. So, sticking with a USB connected printer, you can see at the top here we have got the Epson Stylus Photo R300 that has been detected. This is not an installed printer driver, it simply means the computer has recognised this device connected to a USB port. And to be honest, if your computer doesn't recognise your device, your printer connected to a USB port, you're going to have great difficulties setting it up as a printer. So again, we'll stick with that and go forward like that, and it's going to search for drivers. And here, as you can see, there are various options available. There is a downloadable GutPrint driver, or we could use a local driver. So we could use that one, but I'm going to actually stick with a local driver just to show you all the options. So we'll click on forward, and you'll see here lots of options exist. We could, for some printers, go back to generic, so I'll just show you what the generic drivers would be. We'll go forward on that. These are generally options which are pretty useful if you're setting up a laser printer. You can see all the standard PCL options here. They're pretty useful if you're setting up a dot matrix printer. They're not so good for setting up an inkjet printer as we're doing here. So as Linux originally suggested, we're going to go by the make of the printer and try and pick a driver that way. So we'll click on Epson as you would expect. And it's already picked for us Stylus Photo R300. So we'll run with that driver, but we could change it if we wanted to. And it's now showing us the name it's going to use for the printer. Again, we could edit this if we wish, but we'll leave that as it is. And there we are, the printer has been added. And I'm not going to print a test page. Ink for this printer is difficult to come by, so I'm going to just cancel on that. And if we open up the driver, you'll see it's exactly what we had previously. We still haven't got the ability to view ink and toner levels. I'm not really surprised. We've just repeated manually the process we had via automatic detection. But at least it gives us another option for setting up the printer. We could try other drivers here if we wanted to. Final thing I want to show you is if we get rid of this again, let's just delete that driver. What we're doing here is setting up the printer using a configuration app in the operating system. And all modern Linux distros will have one of these. But there is another way to add a printer using the CUPS printing system, and that is to go to a browser like this and to go to a local address, localhost 631. And this gets us to the web interface for CUPS. Let's just make it slightly bigger like that. And here, if we go to administration and we go to add printer, we could again repeat the process of adding in a printer. And here we have to put in our username and password. This is the one for the machine itself. Nice and simple here. And I don't want to save that ever. Thank you very much. And we now get similar options as we had previously. Again, we could pick up our Epson Stylus Photo printer and continue. Again, we've got the printer name to go in. Again, we can pick a driver and add. And there we are. Once again, we've added back in exactly the same printer driver. But at least I've shown you the different options there are for setting up a driver manually here in Linux. Greetings! Here I am back again to detail even more options for installing a printer in Linux, although I do want to stress that these days in a modern distro, automatic detection works a lot of the time. But if it doesn't and you can't sort things out manually, as we were just looking at, you could always try to get a driver from the printer manufacturer directly. And the support here varies greatly between manufacturers, but the two best manufacturers in terms of Linux printer support are Epson and HP. So if you're going to be buying a printer you want to use with Linux or might want to use with Linux, if possible, buy one from HP or Epson. And here on the Epson download page for driver software, and if we search for a particular printer, I put in the Stylus Photo there, which we were trying to set up earlier, and unfortunately there isn't a Linux driver for that particular printer. The closest is the Stylus Photo R3000, but as you can see here, it does at least pick up the fact we're using a Linux operating system, and you will find for a lot of Linux printers, particularly more modern ones, there is an official driver available. Even better supported in Linux are printers and scanners from HP. with this very welcoming page here from HP telling us about the HP Linux imaging and printing application, which obviously is designed to help us set up printers and scanners in Linux. And this can be downloaded as a separate application. As you can see here, we can select our distro. Here I'm on Linux Mint. I haven't got an HP printer, but we'll just go through the process of setting things up. We basically download the file, as you can see, like that. And there we are, it's finished. And all we need to do now is to go to a terminal and install it. There are instructions for this on the HP pages we were just looking at, but basically you navigate to the appropriate folder you've downloaded in. For me here, downloads, and you execute the file. And we'll select automatic installation. Yes, it's got a distro right. We have to enter our password. And I'll follow through here with all the defaults. And we've now got to the end of the installation. It's asking me to re-plug in my printer or restart my printer. I don't have an HP printer, so I'll just quit from this here because clearly I can do no more. But as you might have noticed if you're really eagle-eyed, we do now have an HP icon down on the panel, which would allow us to work with HP printing and scanning hardware here in Linux. Now, for any of you still thinking about my Epson Stylus Photo R300 and the driver we installed here where we couldn't look at the consumable levels on the printer, there are, as far as I'm aware, 3 possible solutions. The first one would be to install a Linux utility for monitoring ink levels. There is at least one of those available to install via the terminal. Secondly, we could install a Windows virtual machine here in Linux and install the printer driver for Windows in that virtual machine and operate this printer from Windows. And finally, we could use this TurboPrint. This is a paid piece of software. It costs about €40, and as you can see, it describes itself as a high-end printing system and printer driver for Linux. And fortunately, we can try it out for 30 days, so let's download it and have a go. We have to pick our distribution. We are using Linux Mint here, which is Ubuntu based, and therefore we'll just stick with Ubuntu on that, and we'll just click on download. Same details seem to be on this screen, so we'll just download there. And what we want to happen, well, here in Linux Mint, we can open the file with this package installer, so we'll just click on OK. And now install package. And then, of course, enter our password. And there we are, things are finished, so we can close this down. And I've learnt that the best way to make TurboPrint work is now to restart the system, so we'll also do that. And here we are back again, so let's go into the TurboPrint control there, where we can hopefully continue through. And as we're in the trial period, we don't have a key file, so we'll continue again, and continue again like that, and continue and hopefully get to the end of this. There we are, and I'll now enter my administrator password. And here we are in the TurboPrint Printer Control Center. So if we pull that out, we can hopefully now add a printer. And it's picked up our Epson Stylus Photo, as you can see. So we'll continue on that. There we are, continue, continue, and OK. And it's now added the printer. As you can see, I won't print my test page, but with our printer selected, as you can see, I'll go and click on Status Monitor. This will hopefully give us information about the printer. Oh look, we can see ink levels. So it is possible to obtain this type of full functionality in a print driver in Linux, even for an older printer. Linux hardware drivers are certainly much better than they used to be. But this said, there are still occasions where you'll find, for example, someone who can't get a particular Wi-Fi adapter to work on a laptop running Linux. And in this video, clearly I've focused just on 2 things: drivers for graphics cards, for GPUs, and for printers. Those are the 2 things I get asked about the most, but they are just 2 areas of driver support. And I've only covered the basics. There are many ways of finding and installing a driver in Linux, of getting things to work. And I did think of doing loads of things in the terminal in this video, going through all potential methods of things, but they would have been so niche, so focused on particular users and particular bits of hardware, I thought I won't do that. And so my final piece of advice here is, if you are thinking of migrating a particular computer from, say, Windows to Linux, my advice is to write the Linux distro you're thinking of using onto a bootable USB drive, boot it up on the computer you want to install Linux on. Don't install it, just boot it from the USB drive and try it out. And try it out significantly. So try connecting to the internet. Try making sure that the Wi-Fi drivers work. Therefore, if it's a laptop, check that things like your trackpad works if it's a laptop. Does your webcam work, for example? Can you install the printer you want to use? Try those things out with a Linux distro running from a USB drive before you install it on a computer and find you've got particular driver issues. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.